You know what? I'm in the mood to look at concrete walls again for a good 10 to 15 minutes, sure. Exoplanet is described as being a widespread research base on an exotic frontier locale. Now, this wording is actually pretty interesting here because our information is actually pretty limited. We don't actually know what planet this is, and in terms of who actually runs the operations here, we can only assume this company called Grow runs the show. But what is Grow? Well, we don't know. All we know is that whatever they're doing, they're mainly focused on experimental agriculture and hydroponic techniques. So here's the thing. I only just started this video, but I'm already going to start discussing something that I find is really cool. And for that, we're going to have to shift our focus to an entirely different game, Apex Legends. Oh, come on, guys. Okay. I know Apex doesn't really have the best reputation, but come on, guys, lore. Who doesn't like a bit of lore, right? Back in the distant past of 2021, Season 9 of Apex Legends will be released that year, and while the season itself was pretty good with the introduction of Valkyrie and one of the best cinematics Apex has ever produced, we also got a side story in the form of the Legacy Antigen. Long story short, an unknown ship comes in with a bioweapon in the form of these Medusa vines. People die, the Legends find a cure, and the end. But what's really important here is, as you guess, these plants. As it turns out, these Medusa vines are originally from the planet Typhon. You know, that planet we blew up. And as we were told in the comics, these vines that were found in this cargo ship were part of an IMC project called Project Legacy. Now, even if we weren't explicitly told this, if you look at the skybox of Exoplanet, you can see these tremendous growths of these creeping vine-like plants, which I'm sure you can tell look very similar to the Medusa vines in Apex. And so, here's my theory. After their devastating loss at Demeter, the IMC were getting desperate. That's why they launched so many research projects that the remains of these projects can still be found all over the systems today. And clearly the IMC were not afraid of crossing the ethical line. So it's not surprising to say that if one of their world-ending weapons, the Fold weapon, happened to not work or something, they would have another way of inciting planetary destruction. And that's where Exoplanet comes in. Now, you've seen how volatile these vines can be, and you can't really be hosting this type of thing on the same planet where you're developing another world-ending weapon. So what does the IMC do? They ship off a group of researchers to some random fringe planet where they'll study the effects the plant has while they actively try to weaponize it. As for what happens next, who really knows, right? The one thing we know for sure though is that these damn scientists succeeded in creating a pretty nasty bioweapon. Dropping into the map, we're put onto the west side right by the barracks, and immediately, one of the first things I noticed was how distinct the ambience is for this map. And I'm probably reaching here, but this place is also very windy, and assuming these vines produce spores, it would make it very convenient for the scientists to see how fast they would spread, hence why they chose that specific planet or region. Just a guess though. Now, the barracks we landed by isn't really all that interesting. The coolest thing I could find, I guess, were these spoons and their oversized plates. Going out the back, we can follow the trail towards the northwest sides of the map where we can see our next point of interest. This building! Now, I don't know exactly what this building was used for, but as you see in the footage, I kind of glossed over this water logo, so this building was probably just used as a water treatment facility, which makes sense since this is located right next to the silos. Now, the silos itself are cool, but they unfortunately don't house any sort of unique plant life. At least nothing that's interesting at a first glance. But as we say hi to the Nessie and make our way over to the labs, we'll be able to see the captive predecessors of the Medusa vine. And props to Respawn if they truly thought this ahead, because look at these two displays. While they both house the vines, one container reads that the vitals are abnormal. Perhaps a sign of what's to come? Moving on though, we can see that, hold on, are they collecting the spores directly through the tubes? That's pretty cool. Other than that though, the rest of the buildings are pretty generic and aren't really worth going into too much detail. But before we move on, I'll show off the skybox again. Blackwater Canal is one part of a hidden mountain base that became vital to the IMC Remnant fleet. I kind of glossed over it earlier, but remember when I mentioned the Battle of Demeter? Well, that battle was really important. Demeter was the first planet in the frontier to be colonized by the IMC, and is the closest planet to the core systems, aka our solar system. As such, it contained major refueling stations critical for ships making the journey between the core systems and the frontier take only weeks instead of multiple years. As you might have guessed though, the IMC lost that battle, thus severing their lifeline to their headquarters back in the core worlds. Thus, the IMC had to rely on small supply raids on militia cargo and the planet Cybus, of which Blackwater Canal is located. In terms of location, Cybus was the next best thing after Demeter, as it was located right between it and the next major world, Gridiron. While it's definitely a far cry from the scale of Demeter, Cybus was filled with refueling facilities and repair and refit stations all owned by the IMC. If you want to get really specific though, they were owned by Dionysus, which is a subsidiary of the IMC. Dropping in, we land right outside what is known as the control station. Here we can see that the architecture is very reminiscent of the level in the campaign named Trial by Fire, which is appropriate since that level also takes place on an airbase. Moving around, we can also see these shipping containers filled with what I'm assuming are missiles. I don't know, I'm not a weapons expert. What we have up next though is a lot more interesting because we've arrived at the Marvin Garage. And would you look at that, we have 2 Marvin units. But you'll notice that these specific models are a bit different than the ones you may be used to, and that's because these are older models from Titanfall 1. So then you may ask, why haven't they been replaced with newer models? Well, it's either a developer oversight, or maybe there ain't no point in fixing what ain't broke. And while we're on the subject of Marvins, let's talk about them real quick. Marvins are basically your good old reliable handy bots. Capable of simple simulated emotions, Marvins were often deployed to do menial labor such as guiding dropships to land with handheld signal lights, cleaning windows, carrying cargo barrels, etc. And since they were robots, this also allowed them to be deployed in autonomous remote facilities unfit for human work/habitation, as seen in the beacon level. To the right of the Marvin Garage, we have this little barracks building with a seemingly out of order bathroom and, hey look, a dartboard. Behind that building, we have some sort of technology repair area, I think, or maybe it's a sort of secondary monitoring building, and behind that, we have the armory, which I admit, for an airbase, I thought it would be a little bit bigger, but hey, you get what you get. Opposite the bridge across the Marvin Garage, we have a repair bay, and towards the back of the map, we can see the pump infiltration areas. Judging by the crane too, this area would be where fuel would be stored and transported for the airships. And speaking of airships, if we head up, we can see where the rest of the airbase lies. That right there is a full IMC battleship. Other than that, there's nothing really noteworthy to look at, so we can move on. And finally, the last map we have for today is Eden, and unlike the other maps we've gone over today, the backstory of Eden is little more known, and as a result, we've got more of a straightforward perspective. Straight from the wiki, the IMC marketing advertised the planet to colonists as the perfect place to live, filled with lush, verdant forests and diverse wildlife. Many colonists moved to the planet, expecting a new life away from all the industrialization and pollution prevalent in the core systems. But once the IMC found massive fuel deposits in the planet's crust, everything changed. They started to establish massive mines and quarries, using methods like fracking to get access to untapped resources. After the industrialization of the planet, many of the natural environments like the large forests became deserts, and many species of flora and fauna alike became endangered or extinct. The mining industry on the planet displaced many of the residents, and many of the cities became largely abandoned, with most of the population being IMC contractors or mechanized workers. And due to the fracking, the planet had also become geologically unstable, causing massive earthquakes and ripping the landscape apart. The massive fault lines formed from these earthquakes created mountain-like structures that soar through Eden's sky today. In the present, the train and space elevator remain in operation, maintained by a small community of dispirited IMC employees tied to long-term employment contracts. If you're familiar with US history, you may draw parallels with the Gold Rush ghost towns, or at least that's what I thought of at first. You see, these Gold Rush towns popped up because, well, there were promises of gold, and whether there truly was gold to be found, eventually anything valuable would be stripped away. And thus, the residents would slowly move on until nothing but the empty town itself would be left. As we can see with Eden, this would eventually be the fate of this settlement and the whole planet as well. Except there are still people who are forced to live here doomed by their contractual obligations. Though, the sad reality is, can they even leave? Oh, and before we drop onto the map, let's be clear. The actual name of the settlement we fight in is Arcadia Heights. The planet itself is called Eden. A little confusing, but hey, I'm not the developer. Dropping in, we're put onto the south side of the map by the slums, and I'm sure the thing you'll notice immediately when, well, anybody plays this map is the long train track down the middle. Hopping on and looking around, we can see the mountain-like structures towering above the ground in the distance, and if we look directly behind us, where the train track keeps extending, we can see the giant space elevator in the distance. Now you may ask, what's a space elevator? Well, I'll tell you. A space elevator, in theory, would be a giant structure that would connect the surface of the planet to space. Why would you want that exactly? Well, in theory, this would be cheaper than constantly sending rockets filled with cargo back and forth between space. And forgive me for bringing up Apex again, but as a result, these space elevators would also become hubs for cities and commerce to pop up around, as we can see in Skyhook. But we know what happened. One stroll through the slums and one look at the decrepit signs of a promising future tells you all you need to know about this place. Walking down the left side of the street, we can see something pretty strange that's plastered on the side of one of the unfinished buildings. Now, that definitely says Titanfall, but the T is cut off and there's a Titan decal that's covering the barely visible A. I wonder what's the story behind that one. We can also see the Universal pedestrian car parked nearby as well. Fun fact, originally there were designs for multiple paintovers, but ultimately we ended up with this version we see here. Moving on to the left side building by the train track into the long hallway, we can find a reference to the Titanfall 1 map, Nexus. And I'm not too sure about this one, but this might also reference the planet of Harmony. But I'm not sure since it says District. Up front, we can see some tasteful graffiti scattered around. I like chip. And some tasteful advertisements. As we make our way towards the train station, we can also see more of the surrounding desert and these tall drill-like structures. These are the Thumpers, and judging by how many you can see scattered around, there's no doubt these guys are the culprit of why Eden is the way it is today. At the train station itself, we can see that this area is definitely geared towards more commerce with the shops, and we also have another Titanfall 1 reference, except this time, it's a lot more noticeable with a bright sign for the map Haven. Other than that, we got that weird Titan graffiti that pops up again, and more Thumpers in the distance. So yeah, those were some more cool hidden details in some of Titanfall 2's maps. This is part 2 of a 3-part series, so if you haven't checked out the first video, stay tuned till the end and you'll see it pop up. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to support me, make sure to like and subscribe, and if you want extra benefits, get a YouTube membership. You can also interact with me in my Discord as well. Anyways, this has been Reach, and I'll see ya in the next one. Peace.